If you clicked on this video because you want to find out how to get high distinctions in medical school while studying less, you're in the right place. I know this because I was able to get through the hardest year of medical school studying on average 5 hours a week. And this meant that I was able to spend the rest of my time doing whatever I wanted. In this video, I'm going to share with you the advice that I've used to study efficiently in medical school so that I can enjoy my life and get good grades. The first piece of advice is to do with your mindset. And it may seem cliche, but it's actually really important to approaching medical school sustainably and efficiently. The problem is that if you don't believe you can achieve something, it will spread through every part of your life. In times where you don't feel like doing something, you'll be more likely to take the easy way out and give up. That's why it's so important to believe that you can achieve your goals. But the true mindset shift is actually recognizing that believing in yourself is actually a skill that can be practiced like any other skill. This will manifest every single day, and you can practice being the type of person that believes that they can get better at anything. When you don't feel like doing something and you do it just for 5 minutes, and even if you stop after that 5 minutes, that's actually practicing the skill of tackling challenges and believing that you can do it. Even when you're doing something like a sport that you just enjoy, you can try to get better at it while enjoying the process of playing. This doesn't mean beating yourself up about it if you decide not to do it, or taking everything really competitively, but it's about building an enjoyment of the difficulty and challenge that comes with learning new things. This is a habit that transfers to every part of life, and it means that no matter what you come across in med school, you'll be able to tackle it and think about how you can do better. The second piece of advice is to do with the order in which you're studying. And this is a mistake that massively slows down your studying. And it happens from the moment you start learning. Let's talk a little bit about a common situation in class. You rock up to your lecture and you don't know much about the content because your lecturer is here to teach you the content, right? Well, you turn up to your lecture and all of a sudden your lecturer is going on a tangent and then comes back and talks about things you have absolutely no clue about. You're probably able to pay attention for the first 10 to 15 minutes, but then after a while you get overwhelmed because there's so much stuff to learn. Eventually it gets to a point where you know that there's no point paying attention and you might as well do some online shopping or play the New York Times games. Even though deep down, with a sense of dread, you'll know that you'll have to review the content later. The problem here is that we've turned up to our lecture expecting our lecturer to teach us. This may sound like how things are supposed to work, but it's not actually how our brains function. It is true that lectures are supposed to teach us the content and the knowledge, but the thing is, if we go to class and try to learn everything at once, it's extremely hard to do. The solution to this is to start the learning process long before your lectures. Ideally, you should never be trying to learn something for the first time in class. You should be adding on to knowledge that you already have. What this means is that before any of your lectures or your classes in medical school, you should at least just spend some time priming before the class. Try to get a big picture overview and see how everything relates together. The reason this works is because when you have some prior knowledge, even if you've only studied it for 30 minutes, for example, you're able to put the things that you're being taught into context. It's this context that allows you to understand the content better that helps you actually remember it. This actually leads us on to the third piece of advice, which will let you start learning information so much faster, and it's to learn how to encode. Encoding refers to the process in which your brain remembers things, and it's the key to learning how to remember faster. Our brains are actually wired to forget things, and there are lots of great examples of this. Think about the last time you went doom scrolling on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, or whatever social media platform you use. I can bet that you probably scrolled through at least 10 to 20 videos, but you would only really remember 1 or 2. The reason for this is that our brain is constantly filtering information for us subconsciously, and we remember stuff that is relevant to us. The 1 or 2 posts that you remember are probably the ones that were particularly funny to you, had some sort of value to offer, or resonated with you in some way. All of the others were automatically forgotten by your brain because they just weren't relevant. When we understand this principle, we can supercharge it to learn quickly and efficiently. Applying this means that when we learn things as isolated facts, it's a lot like those videos without relevance to us. We're more likely to forget them. Instead, we can try to learn things with relevance. For example, we can simplify ideas down and relate them to things that we already know about. One really good way to do this is through making analogies. Another thing we can do is that when we study, we can ask ourselves why we're learning the content that we're learning in the first place. This makes us think about why the content is important, because if we don't know why, there might not be a point to learning it. If you'd like to see this in action, make sure to subscribe, because I've got a live demonstration doing exactly this coming out next week. This takes us to the fourth piece of advice, which will let you finally feel useful on placement. Placement is one of those things in med school that can be really difficult to make efficient. But trust me, I've tried. My university has always hammered into us that attendance at clinical placements is key, and that getting involved is really important. But for a very long period of time, I found this quite hard to do. It's so easy to find yourself in the corner of the room or the back of the ward round, peering over someone's shoulder and really struggling to hear what the doctors are talking about, and not really learning much and not being involved whatsoever. However, now after 2 and a bit years of placement, I figured out how to do this more systematically, and this is what I wish I had known at the start. A lot of doing well on placement is about having the confidence to be curious. This involves having the ability to think of questions to ask your team and asking to do things from them as well. I like to think about practicing asking one question per patient and a follow-up question that I would ask after. You don't necessarily even have to ask the team that question, but thinking about it will encourage you to think a little bit more critically about the patient and to learn more from your experience. Don't worry too much about whether a question is good or not, because a simple "what is a SPC" or "what is a EVD" followed by a "what is that for" is usually a good enough question to ask. The other thing is that you'll notice that your team will be examining the patients as the ward round goes on, and quite a few of them will have signs that your registrar or consultant reports back to the junior doctors to document. Whenever one of the doctors says that one of the patients has a sign, for example that they have edema, a murmur, or reduced air entry, try to examine that patient straight after as well, so that you can learn to correlate what the team has found to what you're actually hearing. This sounds silly, but I used to find it hard to examine patients because I felt like I had to ask permission from my team to examine the patients, or I had to wait for them to tell me who to examine. And sometimes you definitely do have to ask for permission, but really the most important person to ask for permission is the patient. Over time, what I've learned is that in most cases, you don't need to ask your team. You can just go to the patient straight after the doctors have finished with them, introduce yourself to them and ask them if you can examine them, and you often learn so much more. The next tip is also about placement, and it's a trap that you can fall into that wastes your time and saps your energy. The problem is that sometimes placement is simply not productive. You can be made to sit in the corner just observing, and the team might not create an environment where you feel comfortable asking questions. Alternatively, lots of patients may be saying no to seeing you, or they may be so specialized that you're not really able to learn much from the experiences, and it might be flying over your head. My first piece of advice is that it's okay to raise these concerns with either your student rep or your clinical site administrator or your head of school. As a student rep myself, I wish that people brought up these issues with me more, because there's often a lot that can be done about it in a way that doesn't jeopardize your professional standing. You can move on to a different team or be assigned a different consultant that's a little bit more willing to teach students. You're not reaching out because you're trying to slack off, but rather because you're keen to learn, and that's a good thing. The second piece of advice that I wish I had is that it's okay to ask to take some time away to do some private study. Unlike the doctors, you are usually not being paid to be at placement, and you also have a high study load to do outside of your time on placement. Everything is new to you, and learning will take longer, so it is okay to ask to leave occasionally if that's allowed. Now let's talk about the exam taking tips that will transform your grades. It's really easy to run into problems with med school exams because there is so much content to learn. The forgetting curve means that you're very likely to forget what you've learned if you don't review it frequently. My number one tip here is to start doing practice exams as early as you can. Even if you're getting a lot of questions wrong, this helps you get an idea of the end goal that you're reaching for, and also primes you with how you'll be assessed. The other thing is that what often ends up happening if you don't do your exams is that you leave them for the last minute because they're the best practice, and then you realize that you don't know as much as you think, and you're not able to do as many exams as you like, and then there's a bunch left over at the end. This leads me on to the next problem, which is to do with an over-reliance on Anki that actually ruins the quality of knowledge that you have. Now, I'm not the Anki police, and you're more than welcome to use it if you want, but I find that people use it more than they need to, and More importantly than that, they don't even enjoy using it. If you enjoy using Anki and it's working for you, then that's great. You don't have to change anything. But if it's not enjoyable and it's not working for you, then you might as well try something else. The problem with Anki is that all flashcards inherently require a cue, which is the stem at the top. This means that if you recall something without the cue, or if the cue is slightly different, you might get it wrong. There are actually a lot of examples of this in medicine. For example, you might be asked about the causes of delirium. Of the causes, one of them might be a UTI. But then you can actually be asked about it in the opposite direction. You can be told about UTI and asked about the complications of a UTI. If you only had a card about the causes of delirium and UTI on it, you could be asked a question that goes the other way around and asks you about UTIs and what possible complication it could cause, then you might actually get that wrong. So when you're preparing for your exams, try to prioritize different methods of revision, even like practice exams over Anki, or do completely different types of uncued recall, like teaching someone from scratch or even blurting everything you know out onto a piece of paper. This leads me on to the last tip, which is to fill in the gaps you find in your knowledge. And this is what actually helps you get good grades. If you do a practice question, get it wrong, look at the answer and understand the answer. That doesn't actually mean that you'll get the question right next time. The thing that's actually happening is that you're recognizing what the answer is, but that doesn't mean you can come to that answer by yourself. So instead, you should try to learn from the question as much as you can. And the way you do this is by letting yourself come to the answer without looking at the answer sheet. If you don't know the answer to a question, look through your resources until you're fairly sure about the answer. This will help you actually learn from the practice exams that you're doing and will let you fill in gaps and improve your knowledge enormously. If you're not sure what this would look like, I actually made a complete guide to this, including a demonstration in my last video. So check it out and I'll see you in the next one.